Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today as we discuss business and technical considerations of disaster recovery to the cloud. My name is Marcus Abdullah with Vigilant Technologies, and I will be your host today. I will soon be joined by our Principal Security and Cloud Architect, Amrita Mukherjee, and the Director of Cloud Strategy and Business Development at Oracle, Mr. Scott Charter. Today, we will briefly introduce Oracle Platinum Partner, Vigilant Technologies. Our presenters will have a candid chat on disaster recovery. We'll have some polls for our attendees to answer. We will share a customer success story. And finally, end today's session with Q&A and a special takeaway for our attendees. Vigilant Technologies is no stranger to the cloud infrastructure. And when it comes to disaster recovery, we've helped numerous companies assess, evaluate, and migrate their DR to the cloud. We'll in fact be joined by one of our DR cloud customers later in today's discussion. Vigilant is a quality choice with a team of experts that are knowledgeable and experienced, providing improved efficiencies and focus on improving processes. We work with our customers on multiple engagements with seamless transitions. In addition, all customers have access to not just our team of resources, but also our leadership to ensure personalized, agile service is always being provided. And finally, we have proven success across the globe, all of which could be referenced, including our 200 plus enterprise clients and 150 plus application projects and over 75 cloud transformation implementations. Now, before I pass it over to our cloud experts, just a few housekeeping notes. Please use the Q&A box on your screen to submit your questions. We'll address any questions at the conclusion of today's discussion. Also, we will have a few poll questions we'll be sharing today. If you encounter any errors submitting your response, please let us know via the chat box. Thank you, Amrita, take it away.
Thanks, Marcus. So hey all, thanks for joining Scott and me today for this candid chat about what we see in the industry when it comes to business continuity and disaster recovery. If you haven't met us before, I am the Principal Security and Cloud Architect for Vigilant Technologies, which is a boutique IT firm headquartered in Michigan. I also have Scott Charter with me here today. Scott?
Hey, good morning. I'm Scott Charter with Oracle North America Cloud. I'm on the Cloud Pursuit team, and I'm the subject matter expert on disaster recovery and business continuity.
Thanks, Scott. So let's dive right into it. So what do we even mean by business continuity and disaster recovery? If we go by the ISO definitions, as you see on the screen, business continuity is the capability of an organization to continue delivery of products and services within acceptable timeframes at predefined capacity relating to a disruption. And disaster recovery is the ability of the information and communications technology elements of the organization to support its critical business functions to an acceptable level within a predetermined period of time following a disruption. So if you distill all of this to the key things that you need to identify while creating a BCDR plan are number one, critical business functions. That is the stuff that your business cannot function without.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, this depends on your industry, of course, but often relates to critical workloads. So if they shut down, revenue stops. And more importantly, customers get angry and possibly might decide to go to your competitor.
Exactly. And it's similarly, there is an acceptable time to recovery as well as to, how long can your critical business function stay offline?
Well, here I'd like to introduce, an industry term, recovery time objective, or RTO.
That's a great point, Scott. We would hear the term RTO, and as we progress, RPO as well quite often when we're discussing DR plans. We'll briefly touch on both of them. So, and number three, being acceptable capacity. So you want to figure out whether you want to operate at full production capacity or is a lower capacity acceptable in the event of a disaster. So, for instance, let's say your production runs on a 5 node cluster, highly available, very resilient, very robust. DR is not supposed to be as resilient and robust and available as your production, at least not in the full scale of things, because it's only a temporary solution, right? So unless you're planning to run on your DR site for an extended period of time, a lower capacity might be acceptable. And then number 4 is acceptable amount of data loss, which essentially translates into how much of production data are you willing to lose?
Well, here we'll introduce what you just mentioned, that recovery point objective, or RPO. Now, while I'm not one to add, too much technical jargon, these terms of RPO and RTO are very important, as they're commonly used, for companies to gauge their current readiness and their ideas for what is possible, and then to balance them against, what the common industry practices are for RPO, RTO, and probably most importantly, what are the costs that are associated with that?
Exactly, and that's still level set between business and IT, right? I mean, that's how you kind of smooth things over when everybody is trying to deal with the crisis. You have predefined RTOs and RPOs, so no one is upset. And similarly, you also define what you call a disruption event. So, and why we talk about that here is because the fabric of technology has changed, and now it's not just earthquakes and tornadoes. There are a plethora of cybersecurity threats and attacks out there that you also have to plan for, and obviously not to forget human error, right?
Yeah, so good point. So while floods and fires, they get loads of attention, but the most common cause of downtime for an organization is human error. And this is morphing when we talk about what is human error. It can take various formats. So hopefully everyone could easily understand, like miskeying a setting can be very common. But that other type of human error that now often allows bad actors to gain access to data, that's where we're opening, the floodgates. One of those, of course, ransomware. Now, this has grown exponentially. In 2014, these events were happening like every 2 minutes somewhere in the world. By 2021, analysts are saying these are now happening as fast as every 11 seconds. So it's just expanding. And that's just ransomware. That goes to, many other types of security breaches that are caused by that human error.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, and like you very correctly said, it's just we just talked about ransomware, but there are like denial of service attacks and all sorts of attacks that we need to um, build resilience against. So, and that in that arena also BCDR plays a huge role. So sum it up, there are 5 key points to consider before we embark on our DR planning journey. Identifying critical business functions, that is very, very important. Making note of our RTO and RPO, that's recovery time objective and recovery point objective. And identifying a capacity that is acceptable to business. And finally, identifying the events that you will consider a disaster. So it's not just the earthquake, but other sorts of disasters as well. All right, so let's pause for a moment here and take a look at our first poll. All right, let's go ahead and answer. We'll give everyone a few seconds.
This is where we get to get user participation to make this more of an active conversation. What's out there with with those that are listening in.
Mm-hmm. A good way of knowing where the rest of us kind of stand in the industry. So all right, so that's good. When was your last successful DR test? 24% says 1 to 3 months ago, which is great. 18% 4 to 9 months. So seasoned people on our call today. 29%. So more than half of our participants actually say it was 9 to 12 months or more, which, especially 29% saying 12 months or more is concerning.
Actually, that's better than what I see normally. And I'm more like usually 75% of organizations that I'm speaking with are talking that they just can't get to doing that testing, but once a year or more.
Right. And that's exactly what I was going to come to as to, but what is in your experience, Scott? What do you see? Where do you think most of your customers stand when it comes to BCDR maturity?
So now that's going to fall into a few different categories, and I need to explain why. So first off, if we have some, like let's say an SMB customer, they might only have backups, but no formal DR, where other SMBs, they might have relied on multiple SaaS services from different providers and often don't have any DR automation that integrates these siloed data from these different SaaS offerings. Now, finally, with more mature companies, so remember here at Oracle, we have over 400,000 customers and they run the gamut from SMB all the way up to the biggest of the biggest. For those mature companies, many may have backups and may have a manual DR plan. But this manual DR might include maybe, let's say, a standby data center and or several manual steps to achieve that DR failover, as well as fallback. A common missing component from everything that I just spoke with most of our customers that we speak with is that they're lacking DR automation. So this is something that I feel that we should be keying in on. When DR automation is lacking, most organizations avoid testing DR because it's invasive. Nobody likes impacting production. So true DR failover and then fallback testing is not done often enough. That's why I was bringing up, it's very common to see a year or more. Mm-hmm. So as we all know, as new components, users, partners, and vendors are added or subtracted, the system morphs and may not allow DR to work unless it is tested more often.
Absolutely great point, Scott. And I think there's also a lot of misconception around moving to the cloud and not needing a DR, which I face more often than I would like to when I'm talking to customers. I mean, look at what happened at the OVH data centers in France, right?
Yeah, so that OVH data center, for those that aren't aware on our call today, that was a fire that, last minute OVH data center operators more or less sent out a notice to all customers, invoke your DR plan. This is going down.
Right, exactly. And, that kind of sends people in a flurry like DR plan. What DR plan? So unless you're moving to a unified SaaS model and not like the siloed model as you referred to, you still need to plan for disruptions, especially cyber disruptions, right? And not just plan, but also test some more to ensure that your plan is actually effective. So talking of testing reminds me of Netflix's Simian Army. So I don't know if you've heard about this, Scott. This is pretty cool. So Netflix embraces the concept of chaos engineering, so which led them to create the so-called Simian Army, which essentially was an outgrowth of their original Chaos Monkey, which imposed failure on random production virtual machines to expose assumptions that they might have about resilience. And then they upped the ante with Chaos Gorilla, which imposed failure at the production availability zones, right? It simulated failures at the entire cloud data center level. And finally, Chaos Kong, which simulated regional failures, so like the entire cloud region going down. So how did this like expensive exercise help Netflix? Well, those of you who don't know, Netflix is hosted on AWS, and Amazon had this huge DynamoDB outage, like their entire US East region was out. But thanks to the stress testing that Netflix did, their system handled traffic failover while other larger companies were out for 7 to 8 hours. Now, for a streaming service like Netflix, that's a huge thing, right? Being out for 7 to 8 hours, that's a lot of angry customers. So now that's a BCDR plan to be proud of. So they not only had a good plan, but they tested and tested and tested till they were sure that they could actually encounter a disaster and still be able to continue business as usual, right? And that further highlights the importance of testing your DR.
This is a great example. Now, I have to at least make one point here, talking about how Netflix had architected for planning on disaster was based on what they're using with AWS. Here at Oracle, we talk about how we actually have a lot more in the way of SLAs that go against this. So you still need to architect for chaos. I totally agree. But here at Oracle, we like to talk about being able to rely on a service level agreement to make sure that you have a little more in the way of uptime. But that's getting off the subject. So let's get back to DR.
Yeah, but that's a good point though, Scott, because that's the second mover advantage. You learn from your predecessors' mistakes, and you re-architect for resilience, and that's exactly what Oracle did. So that's a good point. All right, so I think it's time for our second poll. Bring that up again. A few seconds. Please answer. How would you rate your organization's DR plan?
I think I even know what we're going to see coming back here, just from what I typically hear. But I'm eager to see what our polling shows us on this call today.
Yeah, next time we should have wagers here. I'm putting $10 on number 3. Oh shoot, it's tie.
That we have a very sophisticated group with us here, I think.
Absolutely, and it actually makes me happy to see that, because how many times have I talked to leaders who want to put people naturally are more loss averse than risk averse, and there is a subtle distinction between the two. So unless you actually see a tangible disaster, they don't really want to put in the money towards a disaster recovery plan. But definitely the group that we have here, much better shape, which is good.
So in order to ensure that ongoing modifications to organizational digital architectures don't break the DR plan, they must be tested more frequently, more than once a year or once every other year. This is a situation that organizations of any size find difficult because of that invasive nature of DR testing and the impact on prod.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I kid you not, my first experience with DR testing was when I was supporting GE, and goodness gracious, it was we started with the cold test where we're just testing in silos, then we graduated to a warm test. And then a full-blown hot DR test where the primary is completely gone and your DR is your primary. It was a lot of work. And so I completely understand that why organizations shy away from testing too often. But the good thing is that I'm starting to see a lot of my customers come to us looking to create a DR environment, which is great. And again, I do also see a lot of them finding traditional DR deployments either too cost prohibitive or too invasive, as you mentioned. And I mean, no one wants to pay for a whole environment that's sole purpose is to sit idle, right, for the majority of its lifetime. It doesn't make financial sense. And as you pointed out, DR testing also is pretty invasive. So why have this entire infrastructure sitting idly by, which you're not even able to test the efficacy of. So that's where I think automation tools, especially like automation tools like Rackware, come in really, really handy. So Scott, what would you say to customers that want a robust DR plan but are working on a budget?
Well, Amrita, this is why DR to cloud using automation is so transformative. And here at Oracle, we've been embracing for full stack disaster recovery this idea of using automation tools like Rackware, because it costs pennies on the dollar versus traditional standby data center DR, and can be implemented rapidly. And by rapidly, I mean, we have stories of some organizations using, partner like Vigilant are able to do this in a matter of days, weeks, not months. So it's much faster. And since Rackware allows for this non-intrusive DR failover and fallback, organizations can test much more often, weekly, monthly, instead of yearly.
Absolutely. And with the rapid adoption of technology, right? I mean, there is tool sets and technology popping up every other day. And you have to adopt new technology if you want to change and grow, which is why the fabric keeps changing. So the more we change, the more we need to test. And absolutely, monthly testing instead of yearly testing puts us in a much better position when it comes to resilience. So, having said that, let's quickly take a look at our one of our customers, CentroMotion. Scott, would you like to?
Yeah, before, let me kind of tee this one up. And I guess I should have even mentioned this in the introduction when you asked, who am I? Why am I here? Being one of the subject matter experts at Oracle on disaster recovery, I work with partners, and I have to highlight the reason I'm on this, call with you, Amrita, is your team gets this. You know what you're doing, and as a premium, big time partner of Oracle when it comes to this, we rely on partners that know how to use automation tools, and Vigilant gets it. And here's an example of how your organization was able to build something quite rapidly for CentroMotion. So hopefully we're going to hear a little bit more about this one, but I just got to point out that here is a classic example of using automation with DR to the cloud to reduce cost and speed up DR. Marcus?
Thanks for joining us today, Claudio. I wanted to start this interview off with a simple question. Why is having a disaster recovery plan important to CentroMotion and you personally as a CIO?
In today's world, Marcus, disaster can take many forms. It can be an earthquake. It can also be a ransomware attack. So having a reliable disaster recovery plan is our last line of defense, in which is why it is so critical, not just for CentroMotion, but also for any business that wants to avoid disruption.
Makes complete sense, Claudio. So what made you choose the Oracle Cloud Infrastructure for your DR solution?
That's a very good point. Well, we evaluated many different options for our DR strategy from many solution providers out in the market. We choose Oracle for many different reasons. And number one, Oracle applications can run better in Oracle Cloud, no doubt. Second, since you are in the same environment, licensing is much simpler. And lastly, OCI, Oracle Cloud, is one of the top price performers in the industry.
Okay. So now that you have a functional DR and OCI, what has been your overall experience with OCI?
Once we could get the network connectivity from our data center to the Oracle Cloud, things went pretty smooth. Oracle support has been very easy to work with and provides enterprise level care with no additional cost, unlikely other cloud provider.
Understood. What about your experience working with Vigilant as a partner?
Well, it was great. I have to say that we talked to a few other vendors out there to see who we will be working with for this engagement, but we chose Vigilant because they have a strong knowledge on OCI, and they are very easy to work with. They are true partners because they played an advisory role, talking to our internal teams and Oracle to refine the architecture that would be best suited for our needs. They were great and not just another partner. Support at all hours has been exceptional from the team, from sales to delivery.
Fantastic. That's good to hear, Claudio. Thank you so much for joining us today for this quick chat. We also look forward to many more years working together with CentroMotion.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Alrighty. So always good to hear customers say that a project was successful. So I'm gonna wrap this chat up with just saying that organizations must be aware of and apply standards and best practices related to not just technology but also to people and process. Governance of your technology is also very, very important, right? So, for instance, engineers must develop services around the zero trust model, especially when you're moving to the cloud. You have to make sure that you're building security first cloud architectures, security first cloud based DRs. And leadership must understand and be responsive to all the various risks of consuming services. So whether those are traditional services on premise or they're on the cloud. And you have to be at the forefront of business continuity management. Your business is critical. Your customers are your most valuable asset. You want them to be happy. And it's not just your customers. You might be in the healthcare industry. You might be running a critical application which can have life and death consequences, right? So we got to be aware of all the possible risks, threats, and vulnerabilities out there and plan accordingly. Scott, would you like to add anything to that?
I would. So back to this idea of like, if organizations, it really doesn't matter which industry you're from, you still are going to have you need to have different lines of business get involved here. DR is not meant for just the IT department to build. So one good thing about having the ability to test and test again, if an organization had a plan of like a tabletop theoretical idea of how this DR was going to work, by testing it, we start to see where some failures are. So back to your initial point on leadership and commitment, by getting additional LOB leaders in to say, well, I have a voice at the table here. I'm in, let's say finance. I really need to see our finance app have a much faster, remember that term I brought up earlier, that recovery time objective. They probably want to see that up more than the team that's in charge of the company internal newsletter. That's not as high of a priority. So as you test more, you can actually start to refine this. So this idea of automation. If we could test DR more often, you're going to be able to further refine it so it really fits the needs of that company. It's not a one size fits all. That's the cool thing I want to point out about that. Back to you.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. It's definitely not one size fits all. All right, so I think that's all we had for you guys today. We should open up for question and Q&A right now. Feel free to type in your questions in the Q&A box. If anything is unanswered by the end of this session, please feel free to reach out to Scott or me via LinkedIn. We're pretty active there, and we'll be happy to answer any questions.
Sure. Hey, I see two that have come in that I definitely want to immediately address. One from the Oracle side, working with Vigilant, this, but someone had asked about, what's a little bit more about our SLA and what makes that a little bit different. So we at Oracle, we actually offer, just like every other Generation 1 cloud, an availability SLA. All the cloud operators offer availability. But one thing that we do a little bit different is we also offer a performance SLA as well as a manageability SLA. And I would want to make sure that we at least highlight that. And that's important for when we talk about others in the industry, they don't cover that. One other thing that I saw, Amrita, that I want to make sure that you might help and we should talk about is this idea of what happened during COVID and how did that affect how organizations were planning and executing their DR testing. And that's a great question, because think of key employees that were at, on site that are now at home or are possibly not able to come to work, for sickness issues or whatever. That had a huge impact on a DR plan when a key employee was not there. That was part of the process, that manual process.
Absolutely. Yeah, and we talked about human error, etc., and how COVID kind of amplified all of that, right? Whether it was error or just absence of key players. So COVID definitely, to answer, I mean, the question is, did any customers experience planning and execution of DR testing due to COVID issues? Planning and execution of DR testing, absolutely, yeah. Like Scott mentioned, there were key players missing, unfortunately, and that throws a wrench in the plan. But if you had it all automated and properly documented, that would have been a different story altogether. And COVID, has accelerated digital transformation for a lot of organizations. So it's not just DR. There's been a lot of other digital stuff that we see in the market right now, in the industry right now, just because of COVID.
Yeah. You talk about automation, and another question had come in about, what is the product that we had mentioned earlier, Rackware, and how is Vigilant using this to automate disaster recovery? Can you just speak a little bit more to that?
Yeah, so Rackware it's a great tool. We started using Rackware for earlier for server migrations. I don't know, about 5 years ago, I guess. And they're a cloud agnostic, a platform agnostic tool. It's so cool. They can, because of the way the proprietary technology they use, the way they migrate or even sync your primary and your DR. You can do P2V, V2P, physical to virtual, virtual to virtual, all sorts of combinations. So the product is Rackware, Rackware. Very simple to set up, very, it's very cost friendly as well.
Well,
So-
you say it's very easy to set up. I always recommend that a customer use someone that is certified and knows how to use this. So even though it can be quick and easy, it's
Right.
something that's why you go to Vigilant, because Vigilant it can walk you through on how to get that set up. No need to reinvent the wheel and figure out how to do it yourself.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's where we have all of these products and services, right? And it's not just Vigilant, but just that's how the IT industry works. You don't want to, if you want to innovate and you want to deploy things faster and more quickly and be best your competition, as you said, you don't reinvent the wheel. You go to a partner that's already done this.
Yes, absolutely. And not only done it once, but many times, and it just becomes so much easier. The one thing that I do want to point out about this this tool set that you were able to use with CentroMotion and other customers is the ability to have almost like a dimmer switch on. You dial down the light to exactly what you want, or in this instance, you dial your different applications to a different need. So mission critical, we could have, very quick, a very low RPO, a low RTO, but you don't have to do that for everything. And that's the great thing about an automation tool like Rackware that you've used, Amrita, that you can truly customize what the customer needs for DR to business level or to application.
I'm reading the question right now. Infrastructure level DR and application level DR in challenge. So infrastructure level DR, I think they all kind of go hand in hand. When you are approaching DR, you really should come from the business angle, because that is ultimately the goal. Business continuity and disaster recovery kind of go hand in hand. So it'll come from your critical application level and then trickle down to your infrastructure level. So when we are talking about disaster recovery or resilience, it has to be, you cannot have any single point of failure, right? So then we go into the maximum availability or high availability architectures at the infrastructure level. But when you're coming up with the DR plan, that's the number one point we talked about. You have to identify your critical business functions first. And then from there, you kind of go down to your infrastructure level.
I don't think I see enough organizations realize that they should be looking at this not just at their database, Oracle, here we are a database company, but rather at full stack. What are the different application interactions and dependencies that are needed in order to maintain whatever your business does? And it doesn't matter what your business is, but
Exactly.
if part of it is mission critical, those interdependencies of those applications are probably just as critical as the database.
Exactly. And I think it's just really simplify it, just figure out what your business absolutely needs to be functional for, the time that it takes to rebuild your production, and just work backwards from that.
Did you see this other question that came in about failover or fallback or both? So let's even go back to CentroMotion as an example. There, when we talk about how you automate disaster recovery and what you've done, they go hand in hand. When you need to fail over, in this instance, let's say to OCI into our cloud, once you're done with whatever that event was, and it's time to go back to your primary, you need to be able to fall back. And of course, I think we just assumed everyone understood this. Rackware automatically allows for not only failover, but fall back. They're just as important. And the ability to go back and forth is automated.
Absolutely, absolutely. So it's not just switch over, not just failover, it's switch over as well. So the ability to switch between your primary and secondary, so which is extremely important. And yes, Rackware helps you test that as well.
I think we're seeing multiple questions here on, they'd like to find out a little bit more on how Vigilant would architect this. So although we were talking about this cool tool set, Rackware, which it is, which Vigilant is certified, partner on, it's more than that. There is the experience that your entire organization has on going beyond just an automation tool set. There is so much more to DR than just a single tool.
Oh, absolutely. So automation is only a piece of the puzzle, right? You still have to put the entire thing together, and that is where the BCDR planning starts. So you start with the planning, and then Rackware is the execution, right? It comes in when you're trying to test whatever you have planned actually works or not. So Rackware is like very, or Rackware or any other automation is like almost your end game, but there's still like so much more to be done before we get to that point.
Yeah, that whole idea of getting leadership involved and being able to agree that we need to do some planning first. So often I see this as lacking. So the important part is, what do you want to achieve? What is your plan? Have you ever even decided how much downtime is acceptable?
Exactly.
And does everyone agree on how much downtime is acceptable? Because different lines of business might have different levels of acceptance on an hour, a day, or a week.
Yep, absolutely. Again, it's the planning, and not just the planning, also the pre-mortem analysis, right? I mean, if we need to imagine failures and work backwards from there and plan and size their DR accordingly. I see another question, which is actually in the chat. Let me just scroll up. It says,
And then, Britta, while you're searching for that, just want to alert the audience that while we are approaching the end of the session, our speakers are available today to go over to answer any additional questions. So if you didn't get a chance to submit yours, please do so now using the Q&A box on your screen.
All right, so this is a good question. It's about the network connectivity. So do you have any insight to provide on extending an enterprise network as a subnet into OCI using Fast Connect? Yes, absolutely. We do this. So there are multiple ways of connecting your on-premises network to the cloud. So OCI lets you do site-to-site connectivity through VPN tunnels. You can also do Fast Connect. Fast Connect is kind of gives you a dedicated pipe of 1 gig, 10 gig, and I think there is another shape available right now. So that's just, dedicated bandwidth. And you don't have to worry about your internet bandwidth in that case. If you are running critical environments up in the cloud, or even, there's a lot of back and forth between OCI and on-premise, Fast Connect is definitely recommended. And yes, we have set it up for multiple customers, both site-to-site VPNs and Fast Connect. So if you want to reach out to me offline, I can help you on the technical side of things.
I'm seeing a few questions like that, Amrita, and I would highly suggest that anyone that's listening now consider, just go and talk with Vigilant, set up a time to say, let's at least talk about what we have today. And there should be, I know I live and breathe DR, and I think it's fun to be able to sit down with someone and roll up your sleeves and say, where are you today? Where do you see that you're lacking? And then let us at least help you point out what you might want to look to for the future, aspirational.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, performing that gap analysis is extremely important, right? Knowing where the holes are. I see a comment saying we're seriously considering OCI for DR and such information. So yeah, absolutely. Please feel free to reach out to any of us. All of us here are more than happy to help you. We actually have a special takeaway for this webinar. Marcus, if you can move to that slide really quickly before I tackle the other questions. So we, just so in interest of time, we are doing a free assessment for the first 5 customers that reach out to us for kind of like, if you have a disaster recovery strategy, we will review your current DR plan. We'll identify the gaps and holes, and we'll provide recommendations. And the recommendations essentially translates into a roadmap, as Scott said, what you should be aspiring to, and what the timelines and costs that are involved to actually put that into action. So like I said, we're doing this free assessment for the top 5, the first 5 customers that reach out to us. Please go ahead and let us know, and we're happy to provide this service. Let me see if we have any other questions. Couple more questions for Rackware. Yes, Rackware is cloud agnostic, so it can do DR between on-prem and Azure as well. But I would highly recommend, if you have any Oracle-specific workloads, so please consider Oracle Cloud for various reasons that I can,
Amrita, I am actually going to be a contrarian here and say, here at Oracle, we all realize that multi-cloud is here to stay. Most people listening in are probably already in multi-cloud. A great thing that Rackware allows is the ability to do movement from one cloud to another. So for those that have workloads that are already in Azure or AWS or GCP, indeed, you can actually fail over into Oracle as a DR point using that automation tool Rackware. And I'm sure you've done that before, Amrita.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, multi-cloud is the reality of our industry right now. There's no one that has just one cloud, and that's not a very good technical decision as well, to just be married to one cloud. There's another question about Rackware. So Rackware doesn't need to integrate with Zerto. Zerto is a virtual machine level replication tool, right? So Rackware does the replication for you. So Rackware will replicate your data and it will keep it in sync. So it doesn't need Zerto or ASR. It'll take care of the replication.
We actually have seen customers that have overlapping tool sets that they'll use. So let's say they had already purchased, Zerto or some other, and still wanted to see what they could do for moving full stack into OCI, and they went ahead and used Rackware in addition to that.
Yep, it again goes into that multi-cloud, multi-tool reality of our situation right now.
Absolutely. And they also they're a little bit different. So without getting too deep on this for the last few minutes of this, realize that every organization is probably a little bit different in what their needs for DR. And that's the reason to have one of those assessments and to go and talk with Amrita and team, because one size DR is not the case.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. All right, so I think I've gotten all of the questions, right? Or am I missing anything? Marcus, do you see anything?
I do not. I think that's it, but excellent feedback and excellent questions from our attendees today.
Absolutely. We had a really, really seasoned group.
Absolutely. So want to thank everyone and just remind everyone again that today's broadcast was recorded. We will send out the recording for everyone to review again or share with your team and set up that time to discuss the DR assessment as you see on the screen here. So I want to take a quick second again to thank everyone. I want to thank Amrita and Scott as well for sharing their knowledge with us today. You can find my information on the slide showed here. Please feel free to reach out and we'll discuss your DR strategy and discuss how we can help secure your environment as well. Thank you all and have a great day.